going to start by introducing myself. My name is Courtney Cowart, and I'm the Executive Director of SIM. And this is the second in a series that we are hosting, which we are calling A New Church for a New World. And this series is continuing through the middle of December. And I'll be saying a little bit more about future sessions. Today, just as a way of just giving a little bit of background for those of you who've joined some of the other SIM conversations, we're going to depart from our usual format, which normally incorporates breakout groups, and use the entirety of our time together for a plenary conversation with our guests. And then on October 13th, 2 weeks from today, on a Tuesday, again at 2 p.m., we will devote a full second session to this topic and utilize all of our time in part 2 for small group work and harvesting and sharing back to the group compelling ideas for how to move our denomination forward in this area of urgent concern. So if you registered today, you will automatically receive the link to return and participate in part 2 of this discussion. But today, I hope you'll feel free to use the chat box function and to add your observations and comments throughout the discussion that we'll be having with our guests. And we have quite a few amazing guests today, as well as the larger group of participants. I think we had over 300 people registered for this conversation today. So it's a very large group, and we're delighted to see this level of interest in our topic today. What will it take for the Episcopal Church to become an anti-racist denomination? I just want to say a quick word about the Society for the Increase of the Ministry. As many of you know, SIM was founded in Connecticut in 1857 as the first leadership organization of the Episcopal Church, focused on recruiting leaders for the ministry and funding their theological education. In the context of today's conversation, I would want you to know 2 things about SIM today. First, that in 2018, shortly after the last General Convention, and as part of a strategic planning review, SIM's board adopted the following statement. From its beginning, SIM has been faithful, nurturing, and rooted in the faith and tradition of the Episcopal Church. That rootedness gives strength. It also means that, like the Church, SIM has been guilty of being elitist and exclusionary. SIM's future, however, is as a multicultural organization, a force for much needed racial reconciliation and healing of the Church and the world. The cornerstone of our efforts is our Becoming Beloved Community Scholarship, which supports theological students with a strong call to the ministries of justice and reconciliation, and who, by their very histories and backgrounds and prior engagements in ministry, contribute to the racial, ethnic, and cultural diversification of the leadership of the Episcopal Church. The scholarship bears the descriptive name of what Dr. Martin Luther King referred to when he spoke of the flourishing human community as it stands for and enacts justice. Quote, the public face of love. And now one of the members of our SIM team, Monique Worthley, and then another member of our team, Jim Goodman, are going to begin our time with a centering reflection, just to kind of give us a chance to take a breath and to really come into the space and to focus on listening deeply to one another during this time. So Monique, wherever you are out there, thank you for starting us off, and then Jim will read this reflection a second time.
I think Monique is experiencing some prevailing noise around her.
Okay.
So I can start off reading it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jim.
This is a poem by Maya Angelou. It's called Equality. You declare you see me dimly through a glass which will not shine, though I stand before you boldly, trim in rank and marking time. You do own to hear me faintly as a whisper out of range, while my drums beat out the message and the rhythms never change. Equality, and I will be free. Equality, and I will be free. You announce my ways are wanton, that I fly from man to man, but if I'm just a shadow to you, could you ever understand? We have lived a painful history. We know the shameful past, but I keep on marching forward, and you keep on coming last. Equality, and I will be free. Equality, and I will be free. Take the blinders from your vision, take the padding from your ears, and confess you heard me crying, and admit you've seen my tears. Hear the tempo so compelling, hear the blood throb in my veins. Yes, my dreams are beating nightly, and the rhythms never change. Equality, and I will be free. Equality, and I will be free.
Thank you, Jim. And I believe we have Monique. Perhaps not.
I'm here. I am here. I am present.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm just having some background noise that's coming and going, construction in the background along with the trains. So bear with me. Am I reading the next one?
Just read that poem.
Yeah,
again.
the second.
Lord, your good daughter, I have been my whole life. I've kept your house clean as sucked bone, starved myself of everything. Your other children have told me is sin. I've sharpened my teeth on the slate of your word with your work's sake. Bridled the glint of my tongue so men will feel strong and not be seen trembling under the soft of it. I've behaved, and for what? Do I hunger myself growing slight on tomorrow's meat? Words, words, your words, as valued here as black credit at an all-American bank. They say, Lord, piety is speaking to you, but madness is hearing you. Speak back. And under this, like all good jokes lies, the truth. No one, in this equation seems to be listening anyway. To you, to our own damn selves. Tell me, how many Black girls does it take to change a mind, or home, or block, or scale, or heart, or course, or country? You, Lord, as you have with your minor prophets, have dragged, or is it called us, up the mountain. Where in the thin air, there are those who got here long before I ever dreamed of it, still waiting on you to finally cash this check. Freedom, am I to continue?
No, that. Courtney, you're muted.
Okay. I seem to have lost my view of the screen. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I apologize. Let me just continue then while I figure this out to introduce Constance Perry. Constance, welcome.
Thank you.
It's so good to have the opportunity to have this conversation with you in community. Constance, may I ask you to just begin by sharing with others a little bit about some of the major work and ministry that you have been doing within the Episcopal Church to give us some context for the direction of our conversation?
Wonderful. Thank you, Courtney, and thank you for those of you who are participating in the webinar and for my fellow panelists here. My name is Constance Perry. I am a lifelong member of the Diocese of Massachusetts and have been involved in a number of diocesan committees, most recently the Standing Committee and the Diocesan Racial Justice Commission, which has recently been formed for the diocese to begin to address issues in our own diocese. I'm a current board member of SIM, and this past few months I was able to, invited to and did chair the scholarship committee that awarded scholarships to people who are going on to seminary, and had the pleasure of sharing that experience not only with Courtney and Jim, but with Miriam. So it was wonderful to be able to have that experience. The other thing that I have been doing for the past 18 years, I can't believe it's been that long, with my husband Dane Perry, is take the documentary film Traces of the Trade, a documentary film that Katrina Browne, who is with us today, produced, and it was her creation as a tool to engage people around the country in conversations about race, and hopefully moving toward reconciliation. It's a film about their family, my family, who were the largest slave trading family in the United States in the 1700s and 1800s. So I have said this to Katrina, but I also want to make a public thank you to you, Katrina, for what you have done, and for the opportunity that it has given me to be able to find a place to add my work and my voice to this work. And we're cousins, so it's wonderful to have family be a part of this.
Thank you, Constance, and it's great to have both you and Katrina here today. So to begin the conversation, I would love to hear you describe and put into words from your sightline, what does an anti-racist Episcopal church look like to you? What does it feel like? And I mean, how does it really operate and function? How would you kind of define it, I guess?
Well, let me preface my statements by giving recognition and gratitude first to those people who I have met along the way over all of these years of doing this work, especially with the Traces of the Trade documentary with my husband, Dane, that the thoughts and recommendations that I'm about to share and observations that I am about to share are a compilation of what I have come to believe through those many conversations. I want to give credit. I have not arrived here on my alone. I want to give recognition and credit and thanks. So there are some things that I think we need to do. One is to create a clear vision of what an anti-racist church looks like, what it feels like, how it operates. I don't know if we have consensus on that. I think many different people will have a different vision. And I think we need to create a process so that we can hear that perspective from a variety of voices. I think there needs to be strong leadership and commitment from the top in order to do this work. We must be determined, understand that this is dogged work and challenging work. I think that this work needs to happen throughout all levels of the Episcopal Church. There are no passes here. The national church, at the diocesan level, and at the parish level. And I think there needs to be a recognition that becoming an anti-racist organization will take time and will be met with resistance. And we all need to be clear-eyed and prepared for that. So what I'd like to do is to share with you five recommendations that I would like to make. And happy to go deeper into those points. First, I think we need to have a deep understanding of the true history, and I'm emphasizing the true history and the true impact that attitudes, behaviors, policies, and many more items that you would add have acted upon all people of color. And that's one of the things that Katrina tried to do through Traces of the Trade, to be able to open a forum and opportunity in that venue for people to be able to look at and discuss the true history. I think there are a number of structural changes that need to happen. Committees, we have lots of them at the national and diocesan and parish level. We need to look at how they're formed. Who's involved in forming them? What are the different viewpoints? Are there people from different races and ethnicities and cultures? What's the pipeline? What does that look like for people who are coming on to committees? Do we create opportunities for them to learn and grow so that when an opening arrives, they are able to step in? We also need to look at, in terms of committees, I think, calling on people of color, but not in a token way of having one or two people. Under structure, I'd like to say a few words about Commission on Ministries. I believe that there needs to be greater racial, ethnic, and cultural diversity. They need to look like our vision of an anti-racist church. I think that the candidacy processes need to be more racially diverse. The pool of candidates need to look more like the anti-racist church that we are envisioning. 3, there needs to be, I believe, accountability, monitoring, and a feedback loop. That's all one area. We need to have, I recommend, true personal and organizational accountability by an independent body that has teeth. We need to monitor the recommendations, whatever recommendations that the church agrees to ensure that they are working, and make adjustments and modifications as we implement those changes. We need to know if they're working. At the national, diocesan, and parish level. Training and support. We need training for seminarians who are going through seminary, clergy once they're in the pulpit, on how to talk about and preach on racism. What Dane and I have heard all around the country when we do our Traces of the Trade work from clergy, we don't know how to talk about race and racism. We are afraid to talk about it because we could lose, people might say this, we're being political, or they're afraid they'll lose parishioners, or it will affect their stewardship. They also need the support from their bishops. They need to know that the bishops have their back and will support them in what they're doing. 4th, and I've got one more after this, there needs to be, I recommend, adequate financial resources to carry out the work. So very often, we figure out what it is we want to do, and there are no resources to do it. And lastly, to recognize that we all have to have a sustained commitment to this work. There needs to be a recognition that this is hard work, that we must do this in community with each other and always in prayer and seeking God's help.
Thank you so much, Constance. I really appreciate that, laying those out to help us kind of have a framework for the conversation from here. And I really appreciate that, because that's going to give us a lot of territory to move around in this conversation. And I can just almost feel everyone sort of chomping at the bit, with a response to a lot of the things on this list. So let me now move to inviting Miriam McKenney into the conversation. And Miriam also served on our scholarship committee this year. And I really feel that Miriam, your participation really shaped the experience for everyone in some really profound ways, just because of the depth of honesty and heartfelt expression of your perspectives that you brought to the conversation. And so I just want to thank you for that, and to say, I was really moved by your sense of possibility in those conversations about what we could do, and particularly from your sightline serving on the Commission on Ministry in your diocese. could you just jump into the conversation and take it to the next level for us?
Well, I will certainly try, and thank you so much for the invitation. I want to just start out by saying that the thing about participating in that, the scholarship committee, was that when I entered it, when I said yes to it, I said yes without really knowing exactly what I was going to be getting into. But here's what an anti-racist organization looks like. I entered into that meeting, and there were 6 of us in the meeting. 3 of us were Black, 3 were white. Now I'm biracial, but I identify as, and I live my life as a Black woman. So just before we even got to the work, I was encouraged. And I honestly, I was shocked and surprised. I had no idea that that was going to be the makeup of the group. And I really see that as a blessing, because I just entered into it with the idea that what I was going to do and say mattered. And sometimes when I get asked to do things, to one of Constance's points about involving people of color in the work of the church, I frankly have to say, you know, are you asking me as Miriam, or are you asking me as a Black woman? Which, of course, I'm both, but you get my point. Sometimes people need me to go into a space to be just me, and with my skills and with my experience. And some people, sometimes I need to come in as a Black woman, and the me is secondary to that. And as long as we're upfront about that, I can deal with that. So I agree with everything Constance said wholeheartedly. And I really think that at the root of everything that she said is what we say that we believe as Christians, which is that we are created in the image of God. And if we are created in the image of God, it means that we all of us on this call, and all of us in our congregations and in our dioceses and in our organizations, look like God. People who don't worship with us look like God. And to me, if you come in with that understanding, if you are a person who believes that, then you don't have to worry about the questions I know some of you are asking. Well, hold on. We don't have any people of color around us. There's no Black people. There's no Latino or Latina people in my area. So what do I need to do? How does this apply to me? Well, an anti-racist organization is an organization and a community where everyone sees themselves in it. So that means if you don't feel like you have people of color around you, even, before you address that, that does not mean that you aren't singing music out of Lift Every Voice and Sing. That does not mean that you're not seeking out Spanish language music to use during Eucharist. It means that when a person does walk into your church or come to your meeting, you're doing something that reflects that individual. And that is how we do this work. That's how we bring in the people that we say we want to bring in. And that's how I ended up at my church. I walked into that church and we were singing out of Lift Every Voice and Sing. There were maybe 3 people of color in the church out of the 100 so people, but I saw myself there. I heard myself. And I could see myself as a part of that community. And that matters. And so when I started doing when we started really getting into the work of the scholarship committee, I saw that we really had an opportunity to make a real difference in the future of the church by offering funding to people who were African American, Latino, or Hispanic, and Asian American, and Native American who might not have the possibility in another situation, or even when you think about getting loans and how hard that is for people of color, the barriers that we face, that we had an opportunity to make that kind of commitment for the future of this church. And so I really feel that it was just such a blessing. It was a blessing, so many that I couldn't have anticipated, being a part of that group and doing this work and really getting into the conversation of what is it that we want the church to be? What is it that we want the church to look like? And how do we put our money where our mouth is? That is what it comes down to at some level. Because you can incorporate things into your worship and into your meetings, but at some point, you have to be putting some financial backing to this work. We just have to. We put finances to things that are important to us. And so if we see anti-racism as important to the future of this church, which I believe that we must, then we have to put resources to it. Ibram Kendi recently said a few months ago in a talk that he gave, and I really believe this is why I'm committed to doing this work. I'm also on leadership, the leadership team in the Diocese of Southern Ohio for our Becoming Beloved community work. So I devote a lot of my time and passion and energy to this work. But he said, when he was asked, why do you do this? What is it that keeps you going? He said, if we don't do everything in our power to fight racism right now in this moment, we will regret it for the rest of our lives. And history will judge us harshly. And I believe so will God, because we are not being obedient to who God created us to be if we're going to allow our church to continue to be a racist church. We have to do better. And we have it within us to do better. We have our common book to give us the story so that we can remember who we are.
Thank you so much, Miriam. And, I really, there's so many things that you're saying that I really resonate with. And, I really listening to you talk reminds me of the class I taught in Episcopal Church history last semester, and the very beginning of that class, and diving into the history of the Episcopal Church. We really, we had to stop and ask ourselves, who are we from the very beginning here, and to really face the fact that we have an enormous amount of work to do in that regard. And I want to turn to Katrina, invite you into the conversation now. Because when I have to say, Katrina, when I think of a white anti-racist Episcopalian, I think of you. You've done such incredible pioneering work, and a lot of that had to do with delving into our history, and having the courage and the vision to see the ripple effects that could come from one person, one white anti-racist Episcopalian, deciding that she was going to look at her own family's history and trace that and its implications in terms of the history of the Episcopal Church and the history of our country. And so I just want to thank you for being here today, and to extend this conversation now to also, ask you for your understanding of what an anti-racist Episcopal Church, really is and looks like.
Thank you, Courtney. I'm, you know, part of the decision with Traces of the Trade was being willing to, myself with the brave cousins who joined me, be willing to make mistakes on camera, because I figured we would, and if we could do that in a filmed process, we might inspire other white Americans to take some risks. So I always credit the 9 brave souls who signed up for that, and they were taking even more of a risk than I was because I had editing power and they didn't. So thanks to Dane, who's on the call now, and Constance, everything you said. As a cousin, particularly this idea of all the people who we've been influenced by over the years and how the growing is perpetual, I can say for myself. I have still so many more chapters of my unfolding that are in process. So I would love to borrow from another denomination, if I may be so bold, and the theologian, Reverend Dr. Rebecca Ann Parker. I just love her framing in an essay called Not Somewhere Else, But Here. So she's speaking to white folks, and she's saying of herself, my commitment to race, she's a white woman. My commitment to racial justice is both on behalf of the other, my neighbor whose well-being I desire, and for myself to whom the gift of life has been given but not yet fully claimed. I struggle neither as a benevolent act of social concern, nor as a repentant act of shame and guilt, but as an act of desire for life, of passion for life, of insistence on life, fueled by both love for life and anger in the face of the violence that divides human flesh. And then she describes what she thinks white folks need to do, which is to be involved in the steps of conversion. And she defines conversion as theological reflection, remedial education, soul work, and engaged action that move her from enclosure to openness and from disassociation, standing passively and watching racism continue to recycle itself generation by generation, that sort of passive, I'm a good person, I don't need to be involved, to active engagement in the processes that are going to be required, be it in the church or the larger society. So those are words to live by as far as I'm concerned. And I think there's this tension, I'm sure folks would agree, there's always in my mind a tension between the inner work and the outer work. And I was inspired just a couple days ago by one of Catherine Meeks's speakers at the Center for Racial Healing, who is Dr. Fanny Brewster, who's a Black woman Jungian, and to hear her bringing in of the power of the unconscious just reminded me, and she was speaking more as a person of color, what healing looks like at the psychological level. And it, for my, from where I sit, I think that as white folks, we just have to get higher and higher emotional intelligence around what are the sort of deep underlying drivers that either keep us from doing the work, or sometimes the drivers that have us doing the work, but maybe for reasons that we haven't put our fingers on, and that can lead to trouble. So I know myself, I certainly had the phase where I was like, what I wanted more than anything else was forgiveness from Black people. And more than anything else was like Black friends, because that meant by Black people. So being more clear on what I was doing, the tough needs to be forgiven someone else rather than take responsibility for educating myself. And I think I can see in my own evolution the turn that I made from being primarily focused on wanting to make amends to African Americans, to realizing that one of the best ways to do that was to actually turn my gaze to fellow white Americans who are opposed to the very idea that racism is still an issue and needs to be dealt with. And how unfair is it to ask people of color to be the ones to be in that conversation? How much more appropriate is it for white folks to be in that conversation? And there's a phrase that David Camp has coined called racism skeptics. So I like using that phrase rather than racists. It's hard to start a conversation with someone if you're calling them a racist right from the outset. But racism skeptics is a way of bringing some loving attention to wanting to hear where people are coming from. And I feel like if the Episcopal Church is an anti-racist church, part of that is white on white conversations between people who think racism is a major problem in the church and in society, and those who are, to varying degrees, some extreme, some less extreme, pushing back against that notion and positing other views. And those are hard conversations. They've gotten harder and harder in the months and years of late. And they're, for someone who likes to avoid conflict, it's not a conversation I find myself naturally drawn towards, but I have put it out there as a challenge and an invitation to the sacred ground circles that are the primary vehicle for my efforts these days, which I've had the blessing to work with Canon Spellers on birthing that project and being a thought partner with her on the development of that project. So I know some of you here are sacred ground leaders. I see some familiar faces, but for those who don't know, it's basically a 10-session curriculum walking through US history of race and racism and whiteness, and not just Black-white history, but Latinx and Asian American and Indigenous. And it invites people through a conversion process similar to what Dr. Parker describes. And it invites both that inner work
Somebody could
and
make sure that we have
the outer work. So
yeah,
let's stop there.
Let's be sure to have the link to Sacred Ground in the chat box for sure. I think that's such an important resource for everyone to know where to find. And I'm again resonating with so much of what you just said, Katrina. And I have a particular interest. Maybe it's because of my background in ascetical theology, and I'm just a great admirer of Catherine Meek's work. But I do feel that there's a lot of, deep psychological and spiritual work to be done as a person who identifies as white and who is, really aware of, the part of white identity that that can be so ingrained, that has this need for superiority or supremacy. Different words are used, but where does that need really come from? Deep within us, and what kind of really sort of existential posture of sort of being in the world tends to move people in the direction of believing that it is necessary to be in a stance of superiority or supremacy in order to survive. I think it's a very deep and very challenging question. So Karen, could you please join us in this conversation and maybe add, we're hearing a big range of important topics and areas of focus around, what we need to address to be an anti-racist denomination. Can you say something about where you maybe see the priority to be?
But I do, I want to say a couple things. I want to say thank you to the Society for the Increase of Ministry, because you funded my time in seminary. So I wanna be thankful for that. I want to be thankful for, and I am thankful for Katrina, because we spent some time at Episcopal Divinity School, as we were talking about before everybody joined us, but also the work that Constance and Dane are doing in terms of traces of the trade, because I feel like it's brought some ideas and frameworks to white Episcopalians. I remember that Dane, you and I did, we at Christ Church Cambridge, I talked about the Somerset Homecoming, which is Dorothy Redmond's book about the slave trade in North Carolina, and that was an Anglican preacher and his family who were slave traders. So I am one of your New Englanders, and right down the street from where I used to live in Medford, or as they say, no A's, no D's, is a home there, or a place where people lived, folks who were enslaved. And so those of us who think that there was no slave trade in New England are mistaken. But I guess what my primary message is that I loved what was said about the need for vision. And what are we going to do? And for me, it is an urgent concern. As we see what is taking place in our lives in the city, it's an urgent concern that we speak to one another. And I guess speaking to one another and this idea about reconciliation, which is a lot of work that Stephanie, I believe that you're doing, and talking to one another, and sort of owning up to what our history has been. I think that that's really important. And this idea about the justice faith, and but I would love this idea about what is the vision that we're gonna have as people together. What does reconciliation really look like for us? And then of course, this idea of leadership from the top. I think that that's what it feels like we're missing, but perhaps it is leadership from the bottom, moving to the top. And so I think that that's part of it. We talked about the levels, institutional, cultural, intercultural, and behavioral. And so it feels to me like there are so many levels where we need to come together as a people. We need to figure out what we're going to do to heal this nation. And I agree that we are afraid. We are afraid. And I agree also that history will judge us, because what we're finding is that there is this kind of influx of tirade of people. I mean, as we see things that are happening in our country, I feel like that's very strong, very, as we see people in the streets, that kind of thing. And so for me, that is almost overwhelming to see how people are marching in the streets and how we there's a wellstorm of saying that we cannot go on this way. And so maybe I'll stop there. I feel like I've said a lot.
It really does feel like a Kairos moment. And I mean, I have to say just the response of the number of people who wanted to be on this Zoom today to listen in and to begin to be a part of a bigger conversation is an indication, I think, of how urgently people feel we must work harder, we must go deeper. And I know, Steph, that you have been writing a book about this. And so you've been giving it a great deal of thought. And you also, as the presiding bishop's canon for reconciliation, among other things, have an amazing kind of bird's eye view of the church as a whole and what's happening. So I'd love to invite you into this conversation to give us your perspectives as well.
Thank you, Courtney, and thank you especially to the sisters who have been witnessing, even just coming onto this call, like the speakers kind of came on early, and seeing Constance, seeing Karen, and Katrina and Miriam and Courtney. These are folks that I have walked with and struggled alongside for many years, and from whom I've learned so much. So Courtney told me about this panel, and I was like, can I join? Like, I was totally fangirling about everybody else on it. Like, I would really love to join. So I feel blessed already, and just hope that I can offer a little, because I really have been living with these questions. I, like everyone who's on here right now, I have been struggling with a nation that is finally reckoning with white supremacy in a deep and sustained and broader way. Like, we've gone through these cycles, but let's be honest, you haven't seen, like, I have a friend who's like a tall white guy, bald, lives in Connecticut in the burbs, and every single Monday at like 5 o'clock for the last like 3 months, he and his granddaughter go out to a little like corner in Essex, Connecticut, and they hold up a Black Lives Matter sign. He and his 6-year-old granddaughter. That hasn't happened. Like, and I think it's okay to say that something unprecedented is going on. So there's a reckoning that's happening, and it's happening for the nation, it's happening around the world, and it's happening for us as a church. And in particular, really for some time, but certainly since the murder of George Floyd, I have been sitting with the question, can a church steeped in white supremacy, a church as steeped as the Episcopal Church is in white supremacy, become beloved community? And it is a genuine question in my mind. it's not just a rhetorical whatever. It's the question that I wake up with. It's the question I go to sleep with. And it's a question I'm blessed to spend time like this talking with people about, praying with people around. Can a church like the Episcopal Church, so unimaginably steeped in white supremacy, become beloved community? And if it could, what on earth would it take? So I spent some dedicated time this summer really going through what I think of as kind of 3 phases, seeing how this is happening for us as a church, but also kind of engaging that work deeply for myself, in particular writing, in work that led into writing a new book called The Church Cracked Open, Disruption, Decline, and New Hope for Beloved Community. So the end of all of that is that I actually do believe that there's hope for a church steeped in white supremacy to become something else, but only if we take advantage of the cracking open that is happening right now. And if we don't just try to reassemble the pieces into what is the Church of Empire and the Church of White Supremacy. So, so what would it take? I want to show you, can I share screen? I don't know if that's possible. Okay. I want to share screen and just show y'all an image that we've been working with on the Presiding Bishops team and in a number of the interim bodies that we partner with for not just becoming beloved community, which is our overarching vision for racial healing, reconciliation, and justice, but in this moment to be, for us to really kind of imagine what is the work necessary right now. And what we said, and I hope you can see this, is that we want to become beloved community now. And then in order to do that, there are these 3 kind of phases of the work, and they very much still graft on with becoming beloved community, but they're kind of, there's a bit of urgency now, a lot of urgency now, that we need to be telling the truth about our church and its histories that Katrina has helped us all to delve into, and others have as well. I spent time this summer going into a lot of that history, and it's in the new book that I've written, a study guide that will go with it. And I was sickened, honestly. I thought I knew, because I have learned a lot over the years and taught a lot over the years about the Episcopal Church and white supremacy. But to go this much deeper, to see the way at almost every turn in American history, the Episcopal Church was the church that doubled down on white supremacy. When everybody else was saying, we're just not sure, when the British and even the Roman Catholics were writing to the Americans, to the Episcopal Church, saying, you have got to let this thing go, we were the ones who said, no, we're going to protect it. We're going to protect white supremacy. We're going to lift up those who have diminished, murdered, annihilated people of color throughout this nation's history, and before it, we were a nation. So I think it's important for all of us to do that work of telling the truth, confessing the church's role in racial oppression, and hosting public truth convenings. I look forward to far, far more truth and, I call them truth and reckoning, not just reconciliation, but truth and reckoning sessions, where we can really do some of that truth telling. But there's also the work of pursuing justice, so that once you know what you've done, you can decide to be different. You can decide to do something different. You can decide to dismantle what has been built. And again, for a church built not just on, but built for the purposes of empire and white supremacy. And I just need to let that land for a second. The church built in order to bless white supremacy. That's the Episcopal Church we're talking about here. For that church to do anything near anti-racism would require that we leverage our privilege for the sake of liberation. I call it the stewardship of privilege. And I go through this in the book, and I've learned a lot about it just watching, that we can talk about kenosis, that is the self-emptying process of taking the privilege you've been given and deciding to use it differently, like Jesus did. So to me, justice work is how we join in dismantling what's been built for this church and by this church. And moving into solidarity, moving into risky relationship alongside those whose backs are against the wall. And finally, there has to be the work of healing, that long and beautiful and impossibly difficult, but beautiful again, work of healing, where we imagine new ways of being, where we engage in anti-racism training and learn how to be anti-racist and anti-empire. There are ways to live like, there are people who know those practices. And I think that the work of healing is really us breaking free of racism and saying we want to learn different ways of being. We learn that through training, we learn that through storytelling, we learn that honestly through learning the way of love of Jesus. That's how we become those healers and reconcilers in his name. So that's just my hopefully brief look at what I believe it takes for a church steeped in white supremacy to become anti-racist, to become beloved community, to live not for itself, but for others, especially others whose backs are against the wall. May God take us even a little bit closer to that dream.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for that great kind of summation. And amazingly, we've actually worked our way through an hour of listening to all of these incredible ideas. I'm really encouraged to see, Stephanie, that this work is being done at the top of the church. You know, at least at the national adjudicatory level, that level of leadership of the church is really looking at this. And I would just ask you one follow-up question. Are there any major decisions or initiatives that we should be aware of that have taken place during the pandemic that people may have sort of missed, that we should know about? Well, we've got you here to tell us.
Yeah, you bet. So there's so many ways into the work of racial healing and justice. I just put one link in the chat box just around, we're constantly updating our resources and kind of calls to action around beloved community. So feel free to go to episcopalchurch.org/beloved-community. You should also check out, we have a set of resources that, again, we're constantly updating, trying to keep track of what folk are doing across the church and around the world around responding, especially to police brutality and racist violence. So there's another site that we created for that, and that's Episcopal, and I'll put it in the link or in the chat box. But if you go to episcopalchurch.org, most of these things are right on the front page, and it's responding to racist violence. And you'll see there work that the Office of Government Relations has been involved in, work that our racial justice and reconciliation team has been involved in, and work that we're highlighting that other folk are doing. Another thing that I'll just lift up as we kind of come toward the close is you heard from Katrina Browne about sacred ground. And honestly, I believe that sacred ground may be one of the most important gifts the Episcopal Church gives to itself and to the rest of America in this time. Often when we face these moments of great injustice, one of the things I hear a lot of is like, and I say it, I go up to whatever white people I know and I'm like, get other white people to do their freaking work. You know? I don't usually bleep that middle part. And then they look at me and they say, I don't know how. And I feel like with Sacred Ground, what we're doing is figuring out how do you equip a church that is 90% white to do the work? That we can rail and we can spit and we can carry on, and people of color have been like shouldering this burden. We've got to have white folk take the work seriously and get their capacity built up to do the work. And for my money, the work that we have pulled together in Sacred Ground, like we're now at about 1,200 of these circles across the country And that's just ballooned since the murder of George Floyd. So if you're wondering, what could I be doing? I would say go to our Responding to Racist Violence page, where you'll see steps around act, learn, and pray in order to respond to racist violence. But also consider hosting a circle for sacred ground. And even if you're a person of color, I think it'd be fine to ask white people in your life to form a circle and saying to them, can you do this work? If you love me, can you do this work? Can you form a circle of other white people and do this, please? And I think we can ask that of our churches, our friends. I think it'd make a difference.
Thank you, thank you. So I want to just kind of recap a few things. So we've really emphasized Sacred Ground as an incredible resource, and you've met Katrina, and you've met Constance Perry, and we've talked about the work that Constance and her husband Dane do with Katrina's documentary, Traces of the Trade, as a way into conversations on race with all kinds of groups all over the country. And a method of facilitation of conversation that we've also hosted here on a Sim Zoom that, I urge you to investigate as another great resource. I've seen people posting resources in the chat box. We'll make sure that everybody gets a copy of everything that's in this chat box as a resource going forward. And Karen, is there any resource that comes to mind that that you want to throw into the mix here while we have a chance before we hear our closing story?
I just love the resources of the Beloved Community to work with different groups, which is on, Stephanie, on the Episcopal Church line, and also the opportunity, I guess I would just say that to meet together and to talk together. And this idea about fear of speaking to one another, I think, is something that that keeps us separate.
Yes. So we're gonna keep going with this. And in 2 weeks, we're going to host another one. And this time, everyone's been so lovely in terms of, being in kind of a listening posture today. But I know that it's so much more engaging when we can actually, get into groups and give voice to our thoughts and ideas and engage with one another. So I would just promise you that the next time we get together in 2 weeks, that will be the format. And the 2 weeks gives us all a chance to reflect on what we've heard today and to maybe investigate some of the resources that have been shared in the chat, and to reflect on this in our own context and community, and come back together and practice talking about this. Sometimes the best way to get over butterflies and a sense of apprehension and anxiety around having the conversation is just to jump in and begin and try. And to know that we can hold a space for one another that is a posture of receptivity and honesty, and speaking the truth in love.
Courtney?
Yes.
It's Miriam. I don't know where I am on your screen. I just wanted to share one thing quickly in that spirit as to some work that I'm doing in my diocese, and that thanks to Zoom and COVID-19, I can do with other folks as well. I was a children's librarian and a school librarian for many years before I started working at Forward Movement. And so in the spirit of what Dr. Kendi talks about, is that we all need to use our gifts when it comes to this work. We have to bring our A game to this very, very difficult and challenging work. So I've been working on a list of picture books, and what I do is I in order to help people to do their own work around learning, I think a lot of what people lack is education and the understanding of the complex history that slavery and racism have led us to in our present moment. And so once people do have that understanding, it's a little easier to do the work of anti-racism. It's not a little easier, it's a lot easier. So I posted that list in the chat, but I feel why I use picture books is that they're short, and you can convey a lot in a picture book, but you can also have a very robust conversation. And so I do this work with different groups, and I've done some video recordings that I've shared on Facebook where I've had a conversation. I've read a book like Lillian's Right to Vote, and had a conversation with my 3 daughters who are teenagers and young adults about the book. So that is some work that I can do with people, and I can also share the videos, and you can view those. But at the crux of it is the list of books where you can get them from the library, purchase them. I've got some that I've highly recommended, but I think picture books really offer a way. You can read The Cast and you can read The Color of Law, but those books are really long. So if you want to get into it and get some immediate results, I highly recommend quality picture books. So check out that list. And thank you to my diocese who gave me a grant to do that work.
Thank you for that great suggestion. And I'm sure there are many more resources that we could all think of and share. And